Welcome to Angelo's Tennis, and I want to talk about the 5 game situations in tennis. If you didn't know this, this is essential to know. As an expert learner, an expert player, and an expert coach, I'm not sure you need to know this as a player to be a good player, but definitely as a coach, you need to know this. There are 5 game situations in tennis, and they are the serve, the return, the baseline, the approach and volley, and the pass, the passing game. So we have, let me recap. There's the serve, there's the return, there's the baseline game, there's the approach and volley, and there's the pass. Notice what I didn't mention. There's not a forehand, okay? This is important. There's not a forehand situation game that you're going to play. There's not a backhand situation that you're going to play. There's no cross court. There's really no cross court down the line. There's no volley. There's this idea that we're going to practice our volley. It doesn't exist. It's not a situation in tennis. Maybe in doubles, but it's not a situation in singles tennis. Okay, so let's go over I'm going to go over the 5 game situations. I'm going to go over how you practice them. I'm going to give some reasons why there is no forehand situation. So let's start with the 2 that can really be isolated, and they are the serve and the return. Now this is something where I talk a lot about playing the game and playing situations out. The serve and the return is a situation where you really don't need. It can be practiced where you don't really need to play the game. I mean, of course, it has to be integrated. It has to be played with the game as well, but it's something that you can practice isolated. And this is important to remember because the other parts of the game cannot be practiced in isolation. They can at your own peril. And I'll come back to that. Meaning it's risky. So with the serve, and the return, you can step up to the line and you can practice hitting spots. You can practice hitting big. You can practice hitting spots, hitting big at the same time. This is something that can be important. Same thing with the return. You can have someone come out in the court, just serve to you, and you can just rip away to targets. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why these can be isolated, but you see this all the time. Just like you see everything else in the game being isolated, but you definitely see the serve and the return being isolated, where players will come out. They're not, even when they're not warming up, they're just serving, and the ball's not coming back. They're returning, the ball's not coming back. They're not really playing out a situation. Now, on to the next situation where I mentioned the baseline. Now, the baseline situation is a game. You have to remember this. It's a game to be played in a space on a court. There is no forehand situation. Even the cross court and the down the line, etc. It's too. You can practice cross court down the line. You can practice the patterns, etc. I talk about that in a lot of my videos. I have the books that I'm speaking about that have patterns of play in them, etc. But it's still at its core the baseline situation. And that's important to remember because there's so many different forehands from a player's perspective that you're going to hit. And there's so many different backhands and little minor situations that you're going to be in that you're not going to isolate. Again, you can isolate these things at your own peril. And I say that meaning you are taking the risk that you're going to confuse yourself and get it wrong. When you can't really go wrong if you remember it's a situation. Because there's so many variables when you're in the baseline game. You have the different players, the conditions, etc., etc. There's so many things you can't control. Then to sit here and try to say that you're going to control your forehand and practice the forehand, practice the backhand this way, and practice it here. I mean, you can in some ways isolate it, but again, as its core, there's too many variables. It's the baseline game. And if you just remember that, I think that for the most part, you'd be better off. Now, the next situation, and this is one of my favorites, and that is the approach and volley. There's no such thing as a volley without an approach. Think about that. It's not a situation in tennis. There's no such thing as a volley without an approach. Now, I will give you this. If you approach, as you approach, I shouldn't say if, when you approach, play your volley. Let's say you play your volley mid-court. You come to the net. You're going to play. Maybe you play another volley, and it's you finish it off with that volley. It's still in conjunction with the approach and the first volley. Now there may be situations where you're stuck at the net. This isn't a situation that you really want to find yourself, where you're stuck close to the net. Let's say you approach, you play your approach shot, play your first volley somewhere near the service line, you play your second volley to finish, and something goes wrong, and you get another ball, and it's not an overhead, and you're stuck there at the net, and you have to play kind of like a reaction volley. The player plays right back at you, or maybe passes you to the right or left, and it's a really easy pass for them, and you may be stuck in a situation where you're playing this this reactionary volley. It's still so much different from what you see players play when they're just hitting volleys. And, there's nothing wrong with just hitting volleys, but know what they are, okay? They're warm-ups. They're feel-good practices. They're not situations in tennis. It isn't tennis practice. That's not practice. When you're just at the net and you're hitting volleys, or you're at mid-court, or you're between the service line and the net, and you're just hitting volleys from the middle of the court, that is warm-up. It's the same thing from the baseline. When you're hitting cross-court forehands, when you're hitting forehands down the middle, that is a warm-up. It's a way to warm the body up. It's not the way to warm your stroke up. You're warming your body up. It's not practice. That is not practice. That's important to remember, because these 5 situations are what you're going to practice to get good at tennis. Everything else is just warm, really basically getting warm and feel good. And, a lot of players might say, well, that's what I do to feel good. And that's fine, as long as you call it what it is. It's a feel-good warm-up. So we have the approach and volley situation. Then we have the passing shot situation. In the passing shot situation, we have somebody approaching the net, and then you're going to play your pass. Anything. So, for example, person approaches, you come up, you play your pass right off the approach. Person comes up, plays their approach, first volley, and then you play your pass. Maybe you play the first ball to them, and then the next ball is going to be a pass. And anything beyond that is going to be really not. It's going to be what you would call like an emergency. It's not going to be, again, coming back to this idea of one person at the net, one person in the baseline, hitting back and forth to each other. This is not a game. This is a warm up. This is not something you have to quote unquote master. I mean, you sitting there, it looks cool. It might be something that happens over time by playing a lot and going through these 5 game situations. I wouldn't even say that, but going through like your warm up with players, you find yourself in this situation, etc. They're at the net, you're at the baseline, you're banging back and forth 10, 15, 20 balls in a row. Yeah, that's cool and all. It doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean shit that you can hit 20 balls from the baseline to a net player without missing. So again, that is not a situation. I've just laid out what the situation really is. So just to recap, you have the 2 that can be isolated. They don't need to be, but can be isolated. The serve and the return. For most people, it probably never really needs to be isolated. Let's just put it like that. And I'm talking about college players as well, high-level pros, ranked 200, 300. It doesn't really need to be isolated, which I might get into more in future videos. But we have the serve and the return that can be isolated. And then the rest, the baseline game, the approach and volley, the passing shot, doesn't need to be isolated. It should be played in a game format, in a competition where 2 players are playing in a wide open game, not closed situation. And those are the 5 game situations. Like and share the video, because you know it as well as I know it. This is tennis gold, only here on Angelo's Tennis.